The biggest obstacle we have, each of us, is the mind. The greatest obstacle we face is our mind. Our concepts, our ideas, our fears, after all, come from the mind. From what we interpret, what we hope, what we dread, what we think about constantly. And all the strategizing in the world is simply a way to cancel out the mind with the mind. Figure out ways to fool the mind, to sedate the mind, to calm the mind, to suppress the mind with other ideas, other things we tell ourselves. That's why perceptions and ideas have and always will continue to be the average person's best friend. When I say average, I mean anyone who doesn't strive to dig, to uncover layers and layers and layers of deception that the mind conjures up constantly. And therefore does not get to taste wisdom. That's an average person. To put it mildly, in Pali the term is putujjana, which usually means the uneducated, uninstructed, untrained, dense person, the ignorant person. So you could be sitting on a huge mountain of your own ideas, at the top of it, the summit of your own ideas, and still be ignorant of the fact that the mind is your biggest obstacle to happiness, to true, genuine lightness. One of the tools that we have in the Dhamma, in practicing the Buddha's teachings, is sangvara in Pali, which is restraint. In fact, when you look at it, the scope of it is quite extensive throughout the entire spiritual path. In fact, the holy life, the truly lived spiritual life, which is called brahmacharya. In the case of the monastics, it is the celibate life, plus the pure life added to that. Living according to a livelihood that is pure, that is proper, that is the correct path. While you're pursuing wisdom and understanding, development through virtue, mental cultivation, and the gaining of wisdom. These all go hand in hand. That's what we call the brahmacharya, the holy life, the noble, brahmic life. The essence of that is to be found within restraint. Restraint is not something repressive. Never. It is very protective. Now, earlier I was talking about the mind being the greatest obstacle we face, each of us. To understand the language used by the mind, and its constant undulating, labyrinth-like, weaving constantly different ways of deceiving us, deceiving ourselves, always involves some type of keeping us in the dark, keeping us stuck. Why? You always have to look at the evidence. You always have to look for, well, is this true? We have to ask that question. Now, in the case of living life, then when there is discontent, then there must be some suffering taking place. So when I'm suggesting that we have to ask that question, is this true? We're referring to the presence of suffering in our life. Because it will leave its mark. It's like fire that, has smoke. It scorches. After it goes through an area, it scorches. It turns it into ash and charcoal. That's what I mean by suffering, the presence of suffering. So you do not go ahead and paint over that with new ideas. And that is, if you are pursuing a path of understanding and discovery of what is what, meaning you want to attain freedom from that suffering. You no longer are willing to buy the lies you tell yourself. But we are in love with our concepts. We don't know what to do without concepts. You remove concepts and we have nothing to stand on. I mean, that's what René Descartes said. I think, therefore I am. So basically, if he stops thinking, he's lost. He doesn't know what to do with it. And that's how the debacle unfolded and continues to unfold. Not that ignorance, stupidity started with Descartes. No, it was already going on. But you can say that he verbalized it. Oddly enough, we also call that in Western literature or civilization even, the age of enlightenment. What a misnomer. These people had no idea. Thinking can take you to many places except for awakening. It will never take you to peace. Why? Because thinking itself is the mechanism of the mind, which is the, if you want to call it an organ, it is the organ of ignorance. The mind. So when we're practicing, we are not adding more ideas and concepts, states of mind onto the plethora or our CV, our spiritual CV of attainments, of meditation. Trances and things like that. That has nothing to do with the teachings that the Buddha gave us. When you probe deeply into the teachings, into what he actually said and practiced, not just him, but the countless other awakened disciples, fully awakened disciples whom we call arahants. who were indistinguishable from him as far as arahantship went, awakening went. They were at the same level as the Lord Buddha. But we neglect to consider how, in order for a person to be called awakened in this tradition, the mind is not the all in all. Our concepts, basically, are not what bring it about. This is very crucial for listeners to understand. If they seek answers from this tradition that the Buddha gave, we need to pause and consider what he said to bhikkhus who were gathered before he died, who were there asking him, the teacher, as to what will be the signs of end of days of the sasana. Sasana is a term that we use in Pali that denotes the dispensation of the Buddha's teaching, meaning the presence of Buddhism proper, what he himself taught, not later on what it developed into by different cultures, different areas, different time periods. No, what he taught, which we see in the Pali texts, in the suttas, discourses. What would be the signs? They were asking him. And he says, when the days come, in such times where the bhikkhus gather and they teach the public discourses that have nothing to do with I continuously insist upon you all studying, meaning the core teaching, that is sunyata, emptiness. When the bhikkhus stop talking about it at the very least, let alone to explain it, make references to it with other suttas as to what he meant, the teacher meant by this, how he exemplified it through his own personal life. After all, when we talk about forgiveness, it's not like you put it in a file or a folder and you stack it somewhere in a far, in a cabinet somewhere, but it's there. It's not like you're camouflaging things, pretending that something is not there when it is. It is a development of the mind to such an extent that here I'm reminded of those 4 traces that Lord Buddha talks about. He says there's 4 kinds of prints. There's 4 kinds of grooves, if you want to call it that. And this is in reference to holding a grudge or forgiving someone. He talks about the first one by mentioning how it is like a slab of rock, a boulder, upon which a deep groove is placed. By hammering it in. Modern day, we can even call it like using a jackhammer to put a deep, deep crack or deep groove on the surface of this very dense piece of granite or rock, which will stay like that if it's not messed around with for millions of years. The groove will still stay there. Despite all the weathering and erosion, it will still leave its mark. That's one, he says. The second kind is like a line that's drawn on the sand on a beach somewhere. It will take some time. The wind will come blowing on the grains of sand, and maybe the rain, and maybe the waves. if they reach it. Eventually it gets wiped out, however. That's the second, which is still better than the first one, right? The third one, he says, it's like drawing a line with your finger on the surface of a placid lake. You can still see the ripples, but they're momentary. They are there a moment and then they're gone. And then he says there's the fourth kind. It's like the footprints of the birds flying through the sky. That's the Arahant. Now, the Arahant cannot manage to be able to somehow be able to do or live like that if he or she is using concepts. This is what I also mean by concepts will never take you to Nibbana. It's impossible because concepts are conditioned. So are your trances, so are your meditative attainments, no matter how lofty you call them. Or you believe, or you hear others tell you that they are, including all the jhanas, all of them. Including your insights, by the way. They're also conditional. But the understanding which opens the door for emptiness, the experience of emptiness, sometimes called voidness, does not depend on any such things. Because it is not being conduced, it is not being propelled, compelled, brought about by your mental conjurings. In the Pottapada Sutta, the discourse given to the group of ascetics, one of whom was asking a series of questions. His name was Pottapada. You see a dilemma that survives to this day with many circles of even the genuine so-called meditation practitioners, where the bottom line is perception. There's nothing higher than perception, in a sense, for these people. In Buddhism, even that is taken away. Consciousness itself is taken away. There's nothing left. The mind doesn't know what to do with such a state. That is, a mind that has not been prepared. A mind that has not been chiseled through challenging itself by the individual wanting to look beyond the mind itself or some state of being as the state. For centuries you have developed, people have developed different religions and things where even the dissolution into, the river going into the ocean, that image, which is very primal, very, you see it everywhere to some extent, different religions. And then the person, the aspirant or the disciple or whoever it is, the student of that path, respective path, loses oneself into the divine. That's, loses oneself in some being. Okay, so they gave up this small being for the sake of the bigger being. But there is a being. There is some level, some consciousness out there. Okay, I sacrificed mine for the sake of the higher, the bigger picture, gave up this. We're still dealing with perceptions. We're still dealing with, albeit subtler, some might argue, but nevertheless consciousness. There isn't any of that. In fact, these are seen as obstacles. Consciousness itself is seen as one of the aggregates which you have to get rid of. When an arahant dies, they don't carry their aggregates with them, The state is called anupadisesa versus saupadisesa. Saupadisesa means the individual has still remaining residues, basically, are still there. Specifically, we're talking about the individual has the 5 aggregates. Feeling, aside from rupa, which is form, they have feeling, they have perception, they have the sankharas, and they have consciousness. In that sense, they are not freed, despite the fact that they are fully awakened. Why? Because they still have to sustain this body, and this body cannot exist without the 5 aggregates to exist fully. That's why an arahant is not a vegetable, as colloquially, meant in the vernacular. Vegetable, not thinking, not feeling. An arahant is not such a being. He's very much awake, alert, engaged, aware. No one's as aware as an arahant. But nevertheless, they are not freed from the residual impact of these 5. The 6 sense objects, sense perceptions are part of this, of course. The eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind, and all their functions. That becomes a burden. But they don't dominate the mind anymore. The awareness of the arahant. The mind is not registering anymore. How, though? I just mentioned they're fully aware, awake. You have wonderful suttas in the discourses where bhikkhus keep asking this question amongst themselves, and also to addressing it to Lord Buddha. But how does it, because these are individuals who hadn't attained. But how is it that the person is experiencing these things, but he's not affected by them? Could it be that he is not percipient? He's not really perceptive. It's not registering, basically. Is that it? And the answer is no. The person is very much percipient of it, despite being untouched by it. That being untouched qualifier has everything to do with the experiencing of sunyata. It's a living experience. It is not something intellectual. It is not by reading Nagarjuna. Okay? It is not by reading some book somewhere, some philosophical, eloquent argumentation and debating. It's not the result of such things. Nor is it the result of analysis by yourself. It does have everything to do with restraint. Restraint against what? The mind. Our biggest enemy is the mind. Oddly enough, you've heard me say this before, the mind is also has the potential, hopefully, to also be our biggest ally. For this reason, we need to have a life that is engaged in the practice of restraint. Restraint is not simply about physically avoiding doing certain actions that are evil, that bring about negative results to someone, anyone. Not just that. Restraint happens every moment you are awake in your mind. How would you be able to do that without the presence of sati, without the presence of mindfulness? That's why mindfulness is never a passive affair. Mindfulness is very, very deep. Mindfulness itself, if you practice it correctly, in the presence of restraint, this is the moment where we are looking at the mind and the thoughts. Where the individual is able to see the thoughts don't belong to oneself. They're just like those ripples that reach the banks of the lake, the river, the ocean, the sea. It's just there. It's a mind object that arose. There's no authorship as such for you to claim or to attribute to someone, ultimately. The mind, if you're alive, its job is to cognize. That's it. But your concepts come in, breaking down, barging into your awareness and saying, but what about this is me, this is mine, this is them, this is us, this is etc., etc. Basically, it wants to attribute some type of an identity to you, to them, give some type of a possessive, give some kind of a pronoun to it. What is it doing? It's groping in the dark. It's trying to make up things. Why? It's building for you a ground, a floor, some type of a station, some type of a place for you to stand upon, conceptually, emotionally. So this is where we get false assurances by the mind. In other words, concepts. Concepts are mental IOUs telling us that it's okay, because I have this concept. Okay, what happens? Go to any intellectual, any philosopher. Have them remove their concepts. They have nothing else to stand upon. This was the dilemma that every single debater who came to challenge the Buddha 2,600 years ago, when they saw that he was not engaging, sometimes he would say a few words, so there is clarification that he offers, but you see that when he noticed that the person was not there to really learn something, or was not pursuing the understanding of truth, to see the truth, other than just be argumentative, to beat the Buddha in a debate, the Buddha would challenge them by saying these things, and if they still did not acknowledge the outcome of that, he would just stop, seeing that the person was not in it for the right reasons. However, you had so many others who genuinely were interested in understanding and seeing the truth. They realized this firsthand, but they were able to challenge and go beyond and restrain their urges that are run by emotions, impulses, conceit, the sense that I can be better than you. We are equal to each other. You are better than me. These are the three layers of conceit that run society, that run beings, run people's lives. Concepts are fueled by these because they drive the individual to latch on and hold on. So how in the world are they going to give sunyata, emptiness, voidness any time of day? How in the world will they pause to say, am I doing the right thing? Am I substituting one thing with another concept? Basically, you are caught in a prison. You're running from one prison cell to another prison cell. In fact, you're building yourself a new prison cell and saying, aha, this is going to be freedom for me. You are in a prison. Concepts are prisons. How do you know? Remember earlier I was saying the test. To test this. How are you feeling deep down? How is the mind really feeling? Do you feel any sense of heaviness? Constraint. Not restraint, constraint. Do you feel anger, contempt, contention, being argumentative, hatred? Do you feel that? Do you have that? How about greed? Are you craving and longing for things? Do you look at the world that you have around you, inside of you, and feel this is not enough, I want more? Are you greedy, basically? Are you full of lust? Are you full of passions for this or that thing? These are the defilements. And when they are around, suffering is happening. But the concepts are fake buffers that you have established for yourself. That's why deep down, people are unhappy. They're suffering. That's why whenever you go and purchase this or have the means to obtain that, you find out at the end of the day that you're not happy. That's why the Buddha started with dukkha, by acknowledging the fact that there's suffering. That takes guts. That takes real penetrative insight to be able to look and find out. It's like finally acknowledging the fact that you have a shadow. Excuse me. Finally acknowledging that, you've been sitting on this donkey or this pile of excrement that you're standing in. Meanwhile, all your life you've been wondering, where's the smell coming from? So you're looking down, you see that. So this is why this path is all about being courageous to ask the right questions, to find out and to understand for yourself so that you gain freedom. That is what we mean by freedom. When the heart is finally and fully well released. Samma chittang vimucchati, the Pali verse goes, from the Sona Sutta. But you have to be able to see. Seeing does not involve concepts in this sense. Because you're looking beyond what is familiar. And concepts have everything to do with familiarity, conditionality, which ironically and quite erroneously we call understanding. It's not understanding. Therefore, true understanding in this discipline, in this tradition that we call Dhamma or Buddhism proper, is to be fearless. While we hold our ground through restraint by questioning the thoughts that we have, by questioning the sensations we feel registering all the time through the six senses, the mind, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body. And not being so quick to attribute a persona to them, a mask to them, a title to them, an emotional stamping to each. This is what is meant by vipassana. To see things for what they are. Yatha bhutang pajanati. To be able to really know, understand how things come to be. Not outside, somewhere else, in the world out there. No, it's in your mind. Nibbana is not happening outside of you. Nibbana has everything to do with you, nobody else. Nobody else. But it will definitely not take place if what you have are concepts. Concepts are not the enemy either here. Let's be clear about that. Concepts are things, I'm speaking to you after all, using concepts. We have to. This is for conventional sake, for means of conventionality, and these are tools. In fact, people came to the Buddha himself 2,600 years ago debating about these things. And he says, because they were taking these concepts, words, linguistics, which is an entire discipline these days that people make a living off of, write books on, have tenureship in universities. He would constantly remind them that this is just like language. You're using like a tool. It's like finger pointing to the moon, as they say. The finger is not the moon. It can never be the moon. It's simply pointing you in the right direction, to look at the right thing. So even these imagery that I'm sharing, I'm using here, are simply means, methods of conveyance of ideas, but we have to go beyond. So not to rely on your thoughts and ideas and concepts isn't the other form of restraint, which has to do with trust. I have to address these because of the fact that I don't want those predictions of the Buddha to come true as it relates to bhikkhus no longer talking about sunyata. Here I am a bhikkhu and I am talking about sunyata. So, we are engaged in the practice that still delivers what Lord Buddha taught 2,000, nearly 600 years ago. that is still available. But it definitely will not be available so long as we are looking in the wrong place. And that is the mind, full of its concepts. So emptiness must be re-evaluated by each and every one of us. Our understanding of it, that is. Because I've noticed for quite a number of years, in fact decades, things that I couldn't find in the teachings. But people were talking about. Again, you have to always drop down to the person's life. Practicality is key in this path. In Buddhism proper, you always check it according to what you see and observe. That's why this is not a heady affair. This is not something in the clouds up there, ideas and ideologies and philosophies. No. It's solidly rooted in our life, in our everyday life. So sunyata, in the form of our relationship with the mind, our understanding of ourselves, and the ideas, concepts we have of ourselves as being this person, what the other person did to me, what I did to them, what happened, and becoming fixated, crystallized there in that state, that means you've just clipped yourself off of what the Dhamma is teaching. You're now lost in a bubble of concepts, which means you're going to suffer. That's what I mean by practicality. Ultimately, always you can always go and drop down to the basic factual reality, which is, am I experiencing dukkha? Because you will find individuals who are talking about lofty states, lofty mind, states, jhanas this, and enlightenment that, and I don't know, insight this, or whatever. Always calibrate it with the joy factor, the peace factor, the quietude in the mind. Ultimately, that is where it's going to be tested. Even your understanding of sunyata, is it there or not? It needs to be experienced by you, not the result of some analysis through some books that you're reading or some debating, because the impact of it is long-lasting. It is purifying. It is cleansing. It is the Dhamma, simply put.